Welcome to the Red Beard Embodiment Podcast. I am your host, Alex Greene, and I'm on a mission to bring the power of embodiment to people all around the world. In this podcast, we explore how embodiment practices, trauma healing, and knowledge about the human nervous system can help us find our ground, discover new sources of meaning, and create connection in an ever-changing world. The deepest change is embodied change. All right, well, I am here today with Dr. Bob Gillespie, who I've known for probably over 5 years now. And I'm going to call you Bob on this podcast, if that's okay, Dr.
Please.
Gillespie. But Bob is a psychotherapist in Madison, Wisconsin, a long career as the former director or manager for the mindfulness program at UW Health for a number of years. He has a doctorate in marriage and family therapy as his clinical training. Probably 20 plus years, you'll tell us, as a psychotherapist and clinician. And is currently working for the Integral Psychology Center in Madison, Wisconsin. And I've known Bob, and we have a shared interest in some of the modalities that he uses, internal family systems as a model of psychotherapy that we'll be discussing here today, as well as somatic experiencing, nervous system oriented somatic approach that we'll be talking about, and then a bit of a shared connection around Buddhist practice or mindfulness meditation practice. And so what I was hoping to talk about with you today, Bob, is just a little bit about how first, your own background and history led you into the work that you're doing today, and then also how you see your time spent in mindfulness training and meditation and Buddhist thought, how that informs your view of psychotherapy and how you put those things to use. So anyway, thanks so much for taking this time today.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Alex. It's great to see you. Since you've moved away, we've missed you here. So this is a treat to get to talk with you. And you'll have to tell me a little bit more about how things are going in your family. You've got your first Father's Day coming up next month, so love to hear more about that.
Well, that's true. Well, to more pressingly, my wife's first Mother's Day in 2 days?
Yeah,
So
don't screw this up, Alex.
no.
There's a lot. We're all counting on you.
Get things started on the right note. Yeah,
Well,
very nice. Yeah.
what I usually tell people about how I got involved in psychotherapy or meditation is my own suffering. That's what brought me to this, and I think it's what brings a lot of people into therapy, the wounded healer model that a lot of folks in the healing professions identify with. My particular background was one, I started getting depressed around 6th grade or something like that. I didn't even know why. I think I was pretty sensitive guy, so I was absorbing a lot of things that were going on around me. My parents got separated a year afterwards, so I was sort of in the traditional family therapy they might call the symptom bearer, who sort of alerts the outside world that the family system is in need of help. And that was my role. So and so I just put a lot of pressure on myself. I was a perfectionist, and I went to like a fancy private boarding school that was nearby where I grew up. I was a day student there, and I just kind of got lost. I think things that I was really good at leading up to there, I wasn't as good at that in that kind of elite atmosphere. And so I started drinking. I started drinking when I was about 16, and it was the solution to all my problems at the time. And there's a very famous Homer Simpson quote, and he says, "Alcohol, the cause and solution to all of life's problems." And so, if alcohol worked for me, I'd still be drinking. And I think what happened for me was that I couldn't control what happened to me when I put alcohol in my body. And so that kind of went on, and so sort of the depression and addiction, those two things
Sure.
coming together. I got sober when I was 23, so that was about a little over 25 years ago.
Hmm.
Um, Best thing that ever happened to me. But sort of out of that, the necessary sort of growth and looking self-reflection and community through addiction, that's what sort of led me on my path. So I was one of those people who was just terrified to pick something as far as what to do with my life. So I
Sure.
did what my father did, which he was in advertising. So I worked in advertising in New York City, and his company out in New Jersey for on and off for 6 years,
Okay.
and I hated it. I loved the people. The people were amazing, but I remember it was our client was Prevacid, which was a heartburn medication, and we were flying all around the country to do focus groups to test out our advertising concept. So I was sitting in a dark room for about 8 hours a day, eating M&Ms behind a two-way mirror, listening to people talk about heartburn.
Mm.
And I said, I can't do this anymore. So I really wanted to do something meaningful. So sort of getting the gumption up after a few stops and starts of going back to school to do what I always wanted to do, which was to be a therapist. So that was, yeah, that was 20 years ago
Mm.
that I went back to school and left the big city and
Yeah.
tried something different.
And never looked back. So did your so you said you got sober around 23, and was that with the help of a recovery community or from some psychotherapy, or what
Yeah,
was, yeah.
yeah, it was a combination of both. I think that some of the psychotherapy that I did at different points in high school just helped plant the seeds. For me, it was a really good friend who got sober through a 12-step program, and us visiting each other and me seeing what an effect that had on him. And so at that point in my life, I was suicidal. I was thinking about killing myself. I didn't know, we talk about hitting bottom as you sort of, you can't see the future. And when you look back on the past, it everything sort of feels bleak and dark. And it's sort of this intersection between pain and understanding, which, although it's quite painful, there's this opening. And that's what happened for me. So
Mm.
yeah, I got a lot of support, with 12-step programs. We talk about maintaining anonymity at the level of press, radio, film, and social media and things like that. And so, sort of the best way to describe it is that I couldn't do it by myself. I needed a lot of help, and um, in um, in recovery programs, they talk about how there's a wrench for every nut in the program, and I found a good, really good wrench who I credit with saving my life, and he spent a lot of
Mm.
time with me.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, sort of through that, that's um, I've began to learn to trust myself more and more. I began to, uh, I think, I think I began to let go of a lot of things, and but then I really began to open up to what was possible. I mean, I didn't think I'd really be alive
Mm.
at 25 years old. So,
Mm.
um, being able to sort of live life the way adults do is still sometimes quite startling to me that I'm doing that. I'm a like a parent and married, and I own a
Dad,
home.
husband. Yeah.
Yeah, that's quite staggering to me.
Mm. Mm. Was your so you, after the advertising, and then you launched,
Right.
got into what you wanted to do, which was psychotherapy. Was your interest in mindfulness and meditation practice, did that come around that same era?
Yeah.
Was that
Yeah.
related to your recovery process, or a different entry point?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's in the 12 steps, the 11th step, the way it goes is sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with a higher power, and praying only for the knowledge will to carry that out. So basically, there's a contemplative piece embedded in that path. And I think that I was always drawn to meditation. I remember being really depressed in high school and reading The Tao of Pooh by Benjamin Hoff about
Hmm.
Taoism, and somehow teaching Taoism through Winnie the Pooh. And I remember for like 2 days after reading that book, I was like, all my problems are solved. I'm good now. And what I began to realize over time is that I really needed a regular practice to help. And I think so. I got into meditation within that first year of recovery, dabbled around a good bit. I took a yoga teacher training program and taught yoga for a number of many years.
Mm.
What I found was that I really wanted to know, when you like go to a yoga class and they do shavasana, the corpse
Hmm.
pose, and you're
Hmm.
kind of laying there, and I kind of wanted to know what was like supposed to be happening in my mind at that time, and what's the instruction, like how do I work with this thing.
Hmm.
And so meditation was in many ways a way to find a way to be comfortable in my own body, because I think there was so much intensity, so much anxiety, and that was the gateway really to a very different experience in my nervous system. Yeah, that's how it came about. And then let me think. Yeah, so in grad school, I went to Antioch University, New England, in Keene, New Hampshire. It's this wonderful place where I knew a bunch of people who had gone there. So I relocated to Western Massachusetts, and uh, I should preface this, before starting school, I was making such a big career change, and people were like, "Oh my God, like you're not going to make like a quarter of the amount of money you would make if you stayed."
Right.
And so I was having panic attacks at night. Like am I doing the right thing? And I didn't know I was doing the right thing until I started my clinical internship that September.
Mm.
And I felt like 1,000-pound weight had been shed. Just, I was like, this is it. And I was in a rural community in Palmer, Massachusetts, sort of in between Worcester and the Five College area of
Hmm. Hmm.
Massachusetts. And so, um, it was just amazing. Antioch it was sort of like a really great adult summer camp with papers and a lot of self-reflection. So very supportive.
Yeah.
And I found a great clinical internship with a woman who became like my second mother. I worked with her for 4 years,
Yeah.
but I started studying Buddhism that year, that 2003. I started. My background is in Tibetan Buddhist background, so the Shambhala Buddhist lineage was who I practiced with for about 15 years.
Mm.
And so I'm, meditating a lot. I'm doing some weekend programs, and I was hearing about this guy, John Kabat-Zinn, just about an hour away in
Hmm.
Worcester, Massachusetts, at UMass Hospital, teaching mindfulness. So I was able to get an independent study to go there for a semester and do a
Hmm.
clinical practicum there. So it was embedded in a class, and then got to do all the supervision. And what I witnessed in that 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction class, which
Hmm.
is, basically the foundation for meditation coming into the mainstream and healthcare community. And
Sure.
I saw some incredible transformations. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen pictures. Sometimes they do it like a pre and a post of people at a meditation retreat,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
there's like
Yeah.
this kind of softening in their face, and their eyes look brighter, and the sort of the color in their cheeks is different. It was like that, but sort of getting to watch an expert teacher do this. Melissa Blacker was one of the who's a Zen teacher
Uh-huh.
out of
Uh-huh.
Worcester, just a master teacher, and just seeing
Sure.
what happened to people over the course of these 8 weeks was just it was stunning.
So at that time when you were so were you there as a, I assume you had already done the MBA, you'd probably done your own 8 week entry point. When you're witnessing these others
Mhm.
transformations, were you in a
Right.
facilitator role, or what was your role with these groups where you were
Yeah.
seeing this? Yeah.
Yeah, the way the training works is that you're sort of a practitioner observer. So
Mm.
you're embedded in there as a student in the class, but also as somebody who's training to teach the class. And so the way it was set up was we'd spend 3 hours doing the MBSR class in the morning. I'd say there were probably about 35 students in the class, and maybe there were about five of us in the practicum. And then we'd spend, after a lunch break, another 3 hours talking about the class, talking about the curriculum, really identifying sort of what the different choice points were in the class, learning to teach
Hmm.
mindfulness. So,
Hmm.
yeah, it was incredible. And I think I worked at the hospital where I did my clinical internship out in Palmer, Massachusetts. So that's where I started teaching there to the clinical populations there.
Got it. Well, so then late, I know, so I guess here's my question.
Yeah.
Was your teaching of mindfulness and MBSR, is that what brought you to Madison? Did you come to join the program, and lead the program here?
No, I mean, the way that all came together was, like all you had described my background of advertising and then meditation and psychotherapy was sort of this kind of kismet experience of all these things coming together. The
Uh-huh.
way I came to Madison was about 12 years ago. Um, my wife is a professor, and she was so where we were living in Princeton, New Jersey, and I was commuting an hour and a half towards Philadelphia, south,
Right.
finishing my doctorate at Drexel University at a wonderful program there.
Yeah.
And then my wife was commuting 2.5 hours north to the medical school campus at Columbia. So she'd go in Sunday night and come back on Wednesday. And so when we decided to start a family, obviously our present situation was not geared towards raising a child. So she did a national job search, and I'm the portable guy. So I remember Googling, hey, what's in Madison? And because I had heard about Richie Davidson, the neuroscientist out here at UW
Mhm.
Madison, and just all that came together. So I had been teaching in Philadelphia. Um, in a number of different contexts, and also we moved from Massachusetts to New Jersey a couple years before that. So we were in Princeton for 4 years. So
Mhm.
that's sort of the chain of events that brought us here to Madison. I
Got it.
was my son was 8 months old. I was trying to finish my dissertation. My wife was starting like a really stressful tenure track job. We had a hell of a time with the real estate market. It's like the first time I ever tried to sell a house, and oh, it was such a mess. I was I was really stressed out, and that's the thing is that it could have been a time where I could have relapsed either into addiction or depression, anxiety, all those things I struggled with. And it
Mm.
wasn't that it wasn't hard, but that
Mm.
I feel like the meditation practice, that the psychotherapy training, as well
Mm.
as my path in recovery, it just gave me so much support,
Yeah.
even when I was coming to a completely new context.
Got it. Yeah. When you came here, it sounds like you were wrapping up your dissertation.
Yeah.
Were you in practice as a psychotherapist there in Madison and joined the mindfulness program, or how did that
Yeah,
work?
my path was I started working at Edgewood College here in Madison. They have a master's in marriage and family therapy training program. So my first position was as a clinical supervisor there, and then a professor. And
Mm.
then when I finished my dissertation, that's when I started working here at the Integral Psychology Center. Um, I had collaborated with a really wonderful mindfulness teacher out in Philadelphia named Diane Reibel. Again, another sort of master mindfulness teacher. She co-wrote a book called Teaching Mindfulness that I'd really recommend to anyone interested in teaching mindfulness. But she sort of gave me a handoff out here to the group out here. And there's a sort of a legendary woman here in town named Catherine Bonus, who started the UW Health Mindfulness Program about 30 years ago. And she worked with John Kabat-Zinn and Richie Davidson to do that sort of initial big study where they brought MBSR to one of the local biotech companies. And they also, it's the first time I think they did brain scans before and after a meditation training.
I see.
Showed the
Yep.
shift that not only people felt subjectively, but that through measures
Structurally in the brain, there'd been some
structurally in the
changes.
brain. And they also did, I think they did some stuff with the immune system. So they had injected, I think it was like the flu virus or something, so they could track people's immune system response. And also sort of after 8 weeks of meditation, it was this sense of like, oh, wow, it also helps in ways that we can't see.
Mm, mm. Neat. Neat.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
pretty neat. Yeah.
Well, and then you had then you had a pretty significant disruption at what was it? Has it been 7 years? You had a traumatic
Yeah,
brain injury that was a big
right,
a monkey wrench that
right.
was sort of another's. You want
Hmm. Yeah,
what?
yeah. We could talk about
Yeah.
post-concussion symptoms um, and that's how I met you actually. So
Right.
uh, I had just taken the job. Catherine had retired, the longtime head of the UW Health Mindfulness Program. So I was in private practice, and then I took over that job.
Mm.
Um, and I was playing ice hockey, played ice hockey growing up, and was wearing a helmet, the whole deal. And sort of a pickup game with a bunch of old men. None of us are any good. And I raced a guy to the puck. There was a guy I played a little bit harder with because we were one of some of the better skaters in that particular group. And I beat him to the puck, but he kept coming. And so he went right into me, and I leveled him. And but his shoulder hit the side of my head because I'm not a big guy, and I absorbed this blow. And I remember seeing his face of like, and I was like, "Are you okay?" And I went and sat down for a little bit on the bench, felt okay, kept playing. And it was when I was walking home with my hockey bag, realized I was dizzy, and I'd had a few concussions athletically, and also
Mm.
hockey, football, and snowboarding before I
Yeah.
wore a helmet. And so, 2 to 4 weeks for uh, the vast majority, about 80, 85% of people, that things go away. There aren't
Yeah.
any extended complications.
Yeah.
What happened for me was it didn't go away. So I had a headache for about 5 years, just like a really debilitating headache and nausea, light sensitivity, sensory sensitivity. So it'd be sort of like if I go to the grocery store, it would feel like people were moving too fast and too close and too loudly near me.
Mm.
Um, and so, yeah, I kept doing the job, so those things you look back on. Kurt Vonnegut, in one of his books, had a character who'd look back and he'd say, "How'd I do that?" Like, I don't know how I kept going for a while. But it got to the point where I was having trouble reading. Um, and the main thing was that I had a son starting kindergarten. And I said, to myself, I, you know, I want my life to be different. We had taken him to his first kind of play date for kindergarten. They had a sort of a meet and greet with all the new students,
Mm.
and he was so excited. He was running towards the playground, and he stopped, and he turned and he looked back to me, and he said, "I wish you could run with me right now, but I understand why you can't." And it
Mm.
was just like, oh, just
Mm.
opened my heart. And
Mm.
it wasn't that long afterwards, I just had this kind of like full body experience of clarity of like, I need to focus on getting better, and I need to stop working. So that started, I guess I was from stem to stern, it was about 5 years.
Okay.
Um,
Yep.
and once you get past a year of mild traumatic brain injury, still having symptoms, it's very mysterious, unpredictable as to if and when it'll get better.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Wow. But in your case,
Hmm.
fortunately, there was a big turnaround at some
Yeah.
stage. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was, again, we talk about sort of the stressful things in our lives, like
Mm,
the transition to Madison and becoming a dad and trying to finish grad school, all that kind of stuff. But
mm,
this was, I think, the hardest thing I'd ever been through in my life. And so, like, all the things that I had in place were absolutely necessary. I mean, there's very high suicide rates for people with long-term post-concussion symptoms,
mm.
and um, it's there for a reason. I mean, it just feels like this isolating prison in which you can't. I couldn't live anymore, really.
Mhm.
So I came to see you because I heard you're doing somatic experiencing. It was a few years in, and I was saying to myself, if there's anything that I can do for my nervous system to just clear a path
Mm,
for
mm.
this to get better. And
Sure.
so that's uh, that's how I started, working with you, was how um, how to help these because with the concussion symptoms, it has a huge effect on your
On the
autonomic nervous
autonomic
system.
nervous system.
Just
Exactly.
like the
Yeah.
volume is cranked up. Um, so yeah, that was sort of how it went. And so
Hmm, hmm.
um, what finally brought it to fruition, there's a really amazing concussion expert at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center named
Hmm.
Mickey Collins, who's worked with helped Sidney Crosby after the hockey player, missed a year playing hockey because of a concussion, was able to come back. And then the race car driver, Dale Earnhardt Jr., they co-wrote a book together about Dale Jr.'s concussion experience. So he's a guy
Interesting.
who had seen like thousands of concussions. So he kind of knew when to push things where other people were always putting the brakes on. And so it was like 9 months of this sort of rigorous, awful vestibular physical therapy where you're
I
like eye
remember I was,
movements and like just like,
yeah,
and it would make me feel bad, but he would just keep saying, I promise you this is what's going to help you get
this is
better. And
what's
he was
needed.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it took a long time, but it
Yeah.
was 100% recovered since early 2020. I got better just in time for the pandemic.
Good timing. Good timing. Great timing. Oh, well, it's so good to hear that trajectory. I wonder if we zip forward to the present moment. I think I
Yeah,
like I would love just to hear what your current practice is. I mean, I know you work with
sure.
individuals, you work with
Yeah,
couples, you bring in MBSR, you bring in
yeah,
somatics. We'll talk about IFS and SC
yeah,
hopefully here. But how would you describe, who you're currently supporting and how and what you're doing?
yeah. I love working with people, and it really feels um, like what I always wanted to do with my life. There's something really sacred about um, getting to meet with folks and just having them share what's really going on, and to be entrusted with that experience. So, what it looks like, I see a wide range of folks. So, as a result of somatic experiencing and internal family systems, I do a lot of trauma work.
Mm,
Um, I work a lot with couples. There aren't a lot of male therapists. I think it sort of speaks to how much more emotionally advanced women are than men. That it's uh, so being able to meet with some adult men who are
mm.
looking for that kind of thing, and I think that in couples therapy, there's this joke about how do you find the way to the couples therapist, is just follow the drag marks of women dragging their
Dragging their
husbands,
husband
in,
into
in
the, yeah,
heterosexual couples. And
yeah.
so there seems to be something that can be helpful when I work with other sex or heterosexual couples, that
Mm, mm,
um, I can talk with the guy about football and help bring him in, because I do like football. Um, so there is what I feel like it is that everything gets kind of woven together. So um, as a mindfulness and Buddhist practitioners, there's this opportunity to cultivate a loving, connected presence to the people that I see, be aware of what's happening inside of me and leveraging that rather than suppressing it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then just sort of like uh, everything I've learned from mentors, just sort of bringing that in a way that um, can help people develop a more compassionate relationship with themselves, with others. Um, yeah, it's just about the most meaningful thing I think you can do.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Um,
There was some, I was reviewing your website, your listing
yeah,
on you, that integral thing.
yeah,
There was some language I really liked, um, sort of describing your approach. And you made a comment that you're known for being collaborative, and there was just a nice paragraph there that, and it
oh,
gave me
okay.
the, where it gave me the feeling that,
Uh-huh.
this is a process I'm doing with you. There's
Right,
check-ins that the therapeutic effectiveness, the empirical effectiveness of psychotherapy is rooted in that the best
yeah,
outcomes are when people feel that they are, that they're worked
mhm,
with, than worked on. And so it
right.
sounds like that's a little bit part of your
Yeah.
ethos as well.
Well, it's the research is a really positive about the benefits of psychotherapy. It has a very reliable, effect size, sort of akin to like taking, Tylenol or ibuprofen for a headache. Like it.
Sure.
However, here's the thing that's humbling about it is that uh, say you and I are working in therapy, you're my client.
Mm.
Um, I might think things are going great for you, and you might have a very different opinion. And so, what the research reveals is that my view as a therapist isn't necessarily correlated with your view. So, it's very important to elicit client feedback and how the process is going, and incorporate that in because it does break down. And I think this corresponds to other contexts. We were doing some research in the mindfulness program to see that as we had a teacher observational rating scale in which we created along with some researchers at the Center for Healthy Minds of uh, could we actually witness, could we tell who was doing well and who wasn't, who was really benefiting from an 8-week mindfulness program? And it turns out we can't.
Got
we
it.
we have some
Interesting.
good guesses, but as far as participants' ratings and how it correlates with our view as teachers, and so that's why I try to incorporate that feedback loop into everything that I do, because I might have a theory of change for you, but it's very important if it doesn't match up with your theory of change or your experience of change.
Mm, mm, mm.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Nicely said. I wonder if we could touch a little bit around on IFS, internal
sure.
family systems, and
Yeah,
your training was in marriage and family therapy, and Dick Schwartz, the founder of IFS,
right.
he that's his background as well.
Mhm.
And I think you shared with me that your first connection to it was maybe even with him. But what if could you just describe a little bit of uh, yeah, how you came to that, and then I guess
Sure.
how you're holding it
Yeah,
today? Yeah,
yeah. Well, internal family systems is this really wonderful, innovative model that what I really appreciated about it in my field, there's a very strong conditioning and momentum to pathologize people, to sort of put them in different categories. And I don't want to completely dispel that as not useful. I mean, I think it being able to identify patterns in people that are causing, problems in their life and them having some sense of what that is. However, this was so different, this internal family system. So um, I got introduced to it when I was in grad school about 20 years ago, and we had the opportunity to read some books of our own choice. So I read Dick's book very early on, and then he came out to visit. He did some trainings at the New Jersey Association of Marriage and Family Therapy when I was out there, and uh, um, he is, I think actually what drew me most to it was that he, in spending time with him, he's a wonderful human being. At that point, this was back maybe in like 2007 or so, there was this big conflict between some of the state divisions of the Association of Marriage and Family Therapy and the National Association of Marriage and Family Therapy. And he said, I'd like to help you with that. And then he was the keynote speaker at the national conference a few months after that. And he spoke up, like basically on our behalf. And like, who does that? You know, like, especially when they don't need to.
Right.
So, um, yeah, so I was really into IFS, and there's this idea why it works well with meditation is this idea of multiplicity, is that we're
Mm.
not just this one soul consciousness, is that anyone who's meditated a little bit knows there's a whole lot going on inside, right? And you have a voice of an inner critic. You have, another voice that's, quite resentful of people in your life. You have a part of you that just wants to avoid the whole thing, any of this. And
Hmm.
so he provided a framework in which we could do some internal inquiry. And I feel like that mindfulness provides that foundation. So a little bit of background of my understanding, you can add to this as another
Sure.
IFS practitioner is, so Dick was originally a sort of a very traditional dyed in the wool family therapist doing structural family therapy, which is where you would try to sort of reorganize the family.
The external family system.
Yeah, the external family.
Yeah.
Salvador Minuchin, this brilliant family therapist, would do these things called enactments. So we'd probably have different people in the family trying to talk to each other to get something different going on.
Mm.
So Dick was doing that. He was, I think, trying to do some research on structural family therapy with eating disorders. And he was getting very frustrated because it wasn't working the way that he thought it was supposed to work.
Okay.
And to his credit, he started to abandon the plan of just trying to, work this model. And he
Right.
started listening to what his clients needed. And they started beginning talking about these different parts of themselves. It might have been the part of themselves that was starving themselves, or the part of themselves that was binging and purging.
Mm.
And and part psychology is something that Gestalt therapy. There's many models in which it's
Jung had some of that.
yeah,
Yeah.
psychosynthesis. And what's different about Dick's thing, and where it really connects, I feel like, with Buddhism and mindfulness,
Mm.
is this concept of the self. And actually, I should say it's a construct that Dick teaches, but it's more experiential. It's a capital S self, creates all kinds of issues for Buddhists because we talk about non-self.
No, no
So
self. Yeah.
we could go into that in a little bit. It's just, there's a lot of semantics to wade through.
Right.
However, the basis of IFS is that by beginning to identify these parts, that we can begin to unblend from them. So it's sort of as though the parts aren't driving everything. When you're
Mm.
meditating, it's as if like you're not just continually coming out of a reactive pattern, that you have some awareness that something's there. And so it's that awareness that can see,
Mm.
oh, I'm doing this thing again. That's what Dick began to identify as the self, that it had already had everything we need. And
Right.
he's not, was not a spiritual guy at all, a real sort of empiricist. So I think
Mm.
this was startling to him, in
Yeah.
which that if we could help people unblend from their parts, gain access to this capital S self, and then have that self connect with these parts, be able to unburden the pain they were carrying. We talk a
Yeah.
lot about trauma, about people getting frozen in roles and functions from the past. That's exactly
Sure.
these. But I think the other thing that I really loved about it, that also connects with Buddhism and and mindfulness, like John Kabat-Zinn has this phrase, as long as you're breathing, there's more right with you than there is wrong. I think that's
Mm.
maybe one of the most brilliant secular descriptions of what we might call Buddha nature. Um, in IFS, it's all parts are welcome. There's no part, even though it might be causing a lot of problems, that every part has a positive intention.
Right.
They want something good, even like, say, the inner critic, you know, who obviously can cause untold suffering. That
Mm.
oftentimes when we investigate the inner critic is that they're trying out of fear to help us out, to make
To
something,
protect.
to
Yeah.
protect us, to make something happen so that we don't get hurt again. You
Right.
know, that we're good enough in the eyes of the inner critic. So I actually, Alex, so I was involved in, you know, I got very involved in mindfulness teaching for a number of years, and I always sort of liked IFS, but I was narrative therapy was another model of therapy that I
Mm-hmm.
liked a
Mm-hmm.
lot.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until um, one of my Buddhist teachers, Lama John McCransky, who's a now retired Boston College professor. He's a
Mm-hmm.
brilliant Tibetan Buddhist uh, teacher, and what he was doing was adapting Tibetan Buddhist practices and trying to make them accessible in a secular way to practitioners. He got into IFS, has done some co-teaching with Dick Schwartz, and started to integrate IFS into the meditations. So uh, what it might be like is we have a practice in sustainable compassion training where we you think of a moment in your life in which you felt really cared for. We sometimes call them benefactor moments or caring moments. So
Mm.
it could be you know, a time at camp when you had a good conversation with a camp counselor, or
Mm.
um, for me, it's like I'll think of my grandmother and hanging out and playing Matchbox cars on her couch while she was hanging out with me. So you set up that scene, which in Tibetan Buddhism would be like the refuge tree, where you'd be sort of receiving this care from all these amazing beings.
Yep. Yep.
So whenever you do something like that,
Yeah.
there's going to be resistance. There's going to be avoidance. There's going to be things popping up of like, I don't know if I'm doing this right.
Sure.
This is a bunch of crap, like all that
Yeah.
stuff. So John, through his work with Dick, was like, well, let's identify these parts as they come up
Mm-hmm.
and then give them space and then let them receive the care. So it's
Mm.
sort of maybe a reverse IFS kind of thing.
Mm.
Um, and it's an amazing practice. And so, sort of those two worlds coming together brought me back to IFS, and it was during when I was having all the concussion problems. So I went back to my personal therapy, did a lot of IFS therapy myself, and
Mm.
so helpful in unburdening. I think what the concussion was like was that all the things that I thought I had resolved in my life through recovery and, you know, job changes, career changes, was suddenly back because my, you know, my life was in turmoil, being disabled, and IFS really presented a way that I could be with the suffering in a way that it wasn't overwhelming anymore.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. Well said. I mean, to coming back to the notion of the self, and
Right?
I'll sort of share a little bit of my own
Yeah,
kind of trying to
I'd
connect
love to hear from the Zen Buddhist teacher.
connect
Yes.
the model on the
Yeah.
Zen side. I mean, it's such interesting to try to draw these connections and parallels. But as a starting point, something that I always return to, the what I have so much appreciation for in the IFS model is bringing in the notion of the not the notion, but the experiential availability of the self. To me,
Right.
it's a radical move, in the sense, in the way that it's radical in my view is it sets up a condition where when we are conducting and hosting an holding space for an IFS conversation, it's that when we can tap into what we call capital S self or self energy in
Mhm.
the IFS model, that
Right.
it's that so one intrinsic to the model is that we have that.
Mhm.
We can't not have that. Now it might
It
be
can't be created. It can't be
can't be
destroyed. It's just
destroyed.
there. Yeah.
Right, it's just there. And it might be obscured. You may have a lot of activity going on that's making it
Right,
hard to sense or access. But the
right.
idea that it is present, and that in many ways, well, within the model, that is the source of the healing and the transformation. And what I like so much about it is when we can tap into self or self energy from a in a felt sense perspective, with the
Right.
clients, or if we're doing the work ourselves, that it's that aspect of ourselves and the relationship between that and the parts that are in distress, whether it's my overachieving manager or my anxious part, socially anxious part, that that rather than seeking validation, healing uh, from, say, the therapist, that when we can recognize, when we can find our own self energy, that becomes the healing witness, the one who can observe, start to understand these parts, see what their experiences have
Mm-hmm.
been, notice that even if they have been even if there's been distressing activity or confusion, when parts start to have the experience that they're not alone, they're part of a wider system, there's self, and and I'll have you give the definition of self leadership in a few minutes. But when we can start to get from a self-led perspective, now
Mm-hmm.
these parts that have had extreme roles, super strong inner critic, uh,
Mm-hmm.
anxious parts, addictive parts, when they can experience themselves in relationship to something bigger, broader, than that, then that is sort of the healing model. But the idea that process is an internal one, to me, is so inspiring about the model.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's to be able to, and I guess is what IFS therapists talk about is, sometimes they'll do it maybe in a little too binary way of like whether you're in self or out of self,
Sure.
and but you can sense it's usually when you're without agenda, when there's an openness. I know as a longtime meditation teacher, I know that the word spacious can feel like meditation speak. Um, but there's some sense there's just a lot more room.
Hmm.
Uh, there's a lot more choice and options available.
Mm.
And so, uh, as both of us being somatic therapists, it's a felt experience, that you have in your nervous system. One of the
Right.
things that Dick described that was very helpful to me in sort of integrating somatic experiencing with IFS and sort of connects with self is that um, every part has its own nervous system state,
Right. Right.
and so we what we can do is when I feel open, and then when I don't feel open, I can reset myself and sort of work with the part on the spot or ask that part for some more space with the um, with the promise that we'll spend a little more time together after the session, me and this part, whatever's
Right.
coming up. But by being able to do that, um, gaining access to the self, that so many more things can happen in the session, and that the clients can then feel kind of welcome into this process so that they feel it too. Um,
Yeah, exactly. It goes nowhere if they're not feeling it too. Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
right. And that's you know, in Buddhism, obviously, like self is a very kind of loaded term. Same way with ego. You could
Mhm.
in Buddhism, they sort of the quote unquote goal is the experience of egolessness, this sort of shedding of ego. But then in psychology, it's good to have healthy ego strength.
Yeah,
And
ego
so
strength. Yeah, yeah.
that these terms don't quite make sense. So the way that I understand self energy
Mm.
is that from a Buddhist standpoint, that we're not fixated and acting from these parts. that we're aware of these parts instead, and then through this compassionate relationship with them, that
Mm,
they can heal. And then that sort of, I guess maybe I'll say it this way, is that there's, in our culture, when we have problems, and this is embedded in me, just as anybody, is that when there's a
mm,
problem, we want to get rid of it. Or we want to fix it, or we want to avoid it as long as possible.
mm.
And this is different, where um, these parts that are causing problems, we're not trying to get rid of them. We're actually trying to more fully include them
That's
so
right.
that they can feel the wholeness. Um, the other way I describe self is it feels like home,
Mm, mm,
and for parts to be able to come home,
right.
and to, it's like when you get home. Maybe you haven't visited your family in a while, and I'm thinking of like when I would come home from college, and you come home with all your baggage and you put it down, and maybe your mother has stocked the fridge with all your favorite foods because she's so excited to see you. It's sort of that kind of experience. You get to see your childhood pet, and it's this atmosphere in which you feel accepted and you feel like you belong, and that's what um, the IFS process can do for our most problematic parts.
Right. And that exactly. And the idea that it's not just, I mean, because I think such a common experience of when we don't have quite that inclusive model, it's that
Yeah.
some of our parts, okay, I've worked with that one. That manager, that one's
Right.
okay. But this
Yeah.
other one, oh, that one's not. So
Yeah.
when we start to
Yeah.
pick and choose, then the parts that we are exiling or
Mm-hmm.
not including in, uh, it's such an so all of us have an orientation to, okay, well, we're at home in certain parts of our personality,
Right.
but okay, but
Right.
what happens when we bring space and a sense of curious, compassionate,
Mm-hmm.
investigative quality to some of the parts that haven't had that,
Right.
and if we are patient with that, and if
Mm-hmm.
self energy is really present, those parts can also start to feel, oh, I'm also part of this system.
Uh-huh.
uh, and that's when, some of the big
Right.
changes in their, unburdening of their distress or changing some of their
Right.
extreme thoughts and feelings can
Mm-hmm.
happen. So, and to me, as coming through to this, of course, as a somatic worker, the felt sense component of it is just that's the proof in the pudding. And I like your word, a sense of coming home. And to me, that's one of the more
Yeah.
visceral feelings
Yeah.
that we can experience. But talking about Buddhism, I was thinking of
Yeah.
this while you were talking. Something that I feel like I've gotten from the IFS side, it was interesting hearing about the teacher who started to learn from Dick and start to bring it into the
Yeah.
Tibetan tradition. So a reflection I have had is that um, one approach to the personality or the ego, certainly in the Zen tradition, is it's a little bit violent. It's a little bit like, okay,
Cut it. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
in the goal of accessing a more transcendent, a more full quality of our being, accessing no self or self. Again, it's semantic, or Buddha nature. In that goal, the one of the strategies in especially Japanese Zen Buddhism is, yeah, cut the self, in this case the small self or the dimensions of our ego.
Right.
But what I have felt, and and so, for me, a couple decades of meditating, with that being a little bit my approach, that if something arises emotionally, that there's a little bit of a feeling of like, okay, I'm just sort of like, I'm tuning you out because I'm doing
Mm-hmm.
something else,
Yeah.
as part of my meditative direction.
Right.
Um, and I would say certainly there is without question, that's a pathway that develops and leads to growth, and so there's a utility to that technology. But what I'm finding for within my own practice, Buddhist practice, and then with the IFS model, is uh, uh, rather than just sort of tuning out or rejecting, or sort of like trying so hard to be only in no
Mhm.
self or self, that if I can take the time and work with some of the parts, not reject them as bad, not say having an ego is bad, but come to it with curiosity. Hey, what's there? What's your history? What's your story? Um, that then an inclusion, a softening can occur, and then to me, some of the barriers to not being in a fuller experience of ourselves starts to remove when our system and internal
Mhm.
system is quieter. So I think for me, there's been a big learning around not there's no rejection of myself as a human being and my parts and my personality. Quite the opposite. There's an embracing of them, and that too can help support um, uh, being spending more
Mhm.
time in connection with self, or this idea of self leadership. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, in Buddhism, sort of the ideal, what we aspire to is be bodhisattvas, which is being a person who will do whatever it takes to help others wake up,
Mm,
um, to take on any role, any function, to be of service to others. And what when you make a bodhisattva vow, you make a vow to be compassionate to all beings.
mm,
And um, so what Dick talks about is, well, what about the inner beings?
mm.
Is
Yeah.
that we have all these aspects of ourselves, and just as the way you were describing it, like in meditation practice, we can silo very important parts of ourselves, inconvenient parts of ourselves, uh, so that the meditation practice can sometimes act as an unintentional exiling of
Yeah.
things. So we
Right.
shut down parts of ourselves, and what so great is that we can that those parts, just as you talked about it, if you take also that time, maybe you become aware of them in meditation. There are some meditations where you can be compassionately present with them in a more proactive way rather than a passive observer way, but
Hmm.
also
Hmm.
just in conversation and dialogue, either with another IFS practitioner or with ourselves, um, is that the most problematic parts of ourselves can often be the most creative, playful, energetic, lively. Like from a somatic perspective, so much of our life energy can get trapped in these exiled parts. And so
Mm,
when we're able to engage with them, and they learn to trust us, and I
mm.
think meditation provides a wonderful context for that trust to begin, where we realize that we're not like fully blended with a part, that we can actually be in relationship with a part,
Sure.
that it introduces all sorts of new possibilities and sort of aliveness that can come about. There's just wanted to uh, compliment a couple of meditation teachers who are really bringing this in.
Hmm.
There's
Hmm.
a Zen teacher named Flint Sparks who comes
Hmm.
to Madison once a year, and he's been integrating IFS into his teachings and how he teaches Buddhism as well as how he teaches meditation. And you and I have talked about Locke Kelly as well,
Right.
who teaches, basically is adapting very sort of high level Tibetan Buddhist, what they call Mahamudra practices, but
Hmm.
trying to make them really accessible, and doing that through IFS. So one of the ways that he's a trained IFS therapist as well, he'll say, "What is there when there's no problem to be solved?" as a
Hmm.
way of accessing self very quickly,
Hmm.
um, and it's that that kind of experience of self energy where I don't have to pull anything off. I don't have to make anything happen. I don't have to fix anything. That I can simply um, be there and extend with some care and some compassion
Hmm.
towards parts of me that are having trouble, as well as those out in the world, you know.
Right. Right. Where is Lock Kelly based?
He's in New York City, and he's
Okay.
somebody I've just you had recommended me Derek Scott's
Hmm.
IFS training. He's got this 4-month training in IFS called Stepping Stones, and he shows some of Locke's work. And I had met Locke about 20 years ago, teaching meditation,
Sure.
and yeah, so I'm signed up to do something in June with him, and I've been really enjoying again how he teaches. You just sort of you can hear the IFS in it.
Right.
That is really helpful. It's very, very welcoming. It's a very different way of practicing.
Yeah, no, I really liked the document you shared. His notes on,
Oh yeah,
riffing on, what is the self, in an IFS perspective, but and it's clear, his integration from, from his Buddhist orientation.
right.
And I liked the addition. Well, so there's the classic 8 C's, the sort of
Yeah,
qualities of the self that Dick Schwartz
yeah.
articulates: calm, curiosity, compassion, confidence, courage, clarity, connectedness, and creativity. I think those are the
You
eight
get an
C.
A for remembering that. That's incredible. Yeah,
Well, I use it. I like to educate my clients,
yeah, yeah.
but then I have got my list here. So well then, so I liked Locke's edition.
With it, is it 11 eyes? Is that what it
11,
is?
11 eyes of self-essence. I actually even
Yeah,
liked that word self-essence, this
yeah,
idea that it's
yeah,
our essence, but invisible, and now I'm reading it: invisible, intelligent, innate,
yeah,
is, indestructible, infinite, immediate, illuminated, ineffable, intimate, impersonal, inspired, and inherent. A great list. So to
yeah.
me, that gives me new
Uh-huh.
language
Right.
for evoking,
Uh-huh.
what's, because I think with new clients, a lot of it is like helping them feel like what's the flavor. I have people say, well, I don't think I have this self thing,
Yeah.
or I don't have very much of it. And so to me, I actually really like the early stages of working, introducing the model, because it's
Uh-huh.
like I know it's there, and so for that person, and
Right.
so how do we evoke sort of the flavor? And sometimes it's like, well, is there curiosity? That sounds like you're curious about that. That's okay. That's there. Is there any compassion? Are
Hmm.
as you sense that? Yeah, okay. So they can start to recognize that, yeah, actually, a lot of these qualities are present,
Right.
within them. So,
Yeah.
yeah, super neat.
Yeah, one of my narrative therapy mentors used to describe how competency is quiet, amidst the sort of the noise and clatter of problems. And so, um, as you were reading that list, that what stood out to me was that it was intimate and impersonal, and you'd feel like those two wouldn't go together, but it's just the sense that to be really connected, but I also don't have to take everything so personally, that it's
Hmm.
happening. Yeah, I like Locke's article, because I've been studying Tibetan Buddhism for about 20 years, and he really sort of broke down the three aspects of self in a way they do in Tibetan Buddhism. They call it the kayas, the three different bodies. I won't get
Hmm.
Kayas,
Hmm. Hmm.
but um, when he talks about self essence in Buddhism, that's sometimes called Dharmakaya. It's absolute truth. It's non-conceptual. It's huge. They often refer to it as the ground of being as
Hmm.
well. The
Right.
sort of the basic awareness from which all comes out of. The next thing that then he talks about is self energy, which is sort of the relational quality of it. In Tibetan Buddhism, that would be called the
Hmm.
Sambhogakaya, which is the sort of the energetic realm. Speech, the breath, all those kinds of
Hmm.
things are that kind of energetic, and it's actually usually the focus of Tibetan Buddhist Vajrayana practice. And then
Hmm.
you had asked earlier about self leadership. That's more what they call nirmanakaya, or the relative truth, which is our everyday life, our everyday ordinary life. So it's sort of this manifestation of these qualities of self energy, of the 8 C's that you talked about, coming
Hmm.
out into the world um, in a way that's skillful, in a way that's appropriate, of meeting people where they are, not imposing things, knowing when to stop talking, knowing when to speak up, um,
Hmm.
how to be in relationships, that whole thing that I know I will spend the rest of my life um, hopefully trying to make some progress. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I love that. Well, that juxtaposition of impersonal and no, what was it? Impersonal and intimate.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I think about that too. I guess, you know, that's another thing that I've really valued, when we think about the role of the self practically, um, is that, and to me, it does relate a little bit to a Buddhist concept. We don't talk a lot about it in Zen, but I've read about it some other places. But this idea of prajna being sort of a wisdom dimension,
Right.
and then I think karuna being sort of a love or compassionate dimension. And there's a little bit of this idea of prajna is perhaps an experience that brings us into I guess from a into disidentification or into
Yeah.
unblending more towards a,
Right.
a transcendent. So that might be sort of the
Uh-huh.
impersonal
Right.
aspect. But
Yes.
karuna, or the compassionate impulse. And when I think about it in IFS, when we get in contact with some of these exiles within ourselves or
Uh-huh.
within our clients, and that absolutely instinctive movement towards feeling towards, that's a question we use a lot in IFS.
Yeah.
How are you feeling towards that part?
Mm-hmm.
And when we're in contact with self, so often there's a tremendous amount of love that's
Mm-hmm.
being directed towards these parts.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Dick is very right that many of us are used to extending that type of compassion as we experience the world around us. The people, when we can really feel sort of the suffering of those
Uh-huh.
around us, and if we can include our own suffering with
Right.
that, well, all the more powerful. But that sort of duality, I guess I probably shouldn't use the word duality, but the idea that one aspect of the self is of
Yeah.
disidentifying, but that's in no way, that's not impersonal in the absolute sense. It's a very intimate, it's a very loving
Yeah.
experience at the same
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In Buddhism, those sort of two dialectics are described as two wings of a bird, meaning they're both needed for balance,
Mm.
and for our experience. And oh, you said so many great things. Um, oh, about compassion. Yeah, I was
Mm.
thinking about one of the classes that I teach with a colleague now is mindful self-compassion, drawn from Kristen Neff's research on self-compassion and her collaboration with Chris Germer, who's a psychotherapist who's really been at the sort of the forefront of integrating mindfulness into therapy. And in her research, it shows I think about 90% of people will say that it's much easier for them to be compassionate to others than it is to themselves.
Mhm.
And so, how do we actually train in making friends with ourselves? And that's my favorite definition of meditation, is the process of making friends with ourselves.
Mm.
And so, when we say ourselves, who are we actually trying to make friends with? And who's trying to make friends with whom? It gets into big things.
Right, 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 right.
Um, but there's some sense that from a Buddhist standpoint, there is something that can hold all of it.
Mm.
And it's not just this kind of like neutral container. That space has qualities to it. You shared Dick's version of it, the eight
Mhm,
C's, but it's
mhm,
it's open, it's receptive, it's warm, it's
mhm,
compassionate.
mm,
um, and when we can um, begin not only to experience that within ourselves when we're meeting with people, but also to introduce that to other people. In the Buddhist tradition, sometimes they call that pointing out. Hey, it's there, and you have a quick flash of an experience. It's
mhm.
almost so close you'll miss it.
Right.
And so I don't think I've ever encountered anything else as skillful as IFS in sort of finding a different way of doing that. It's sort of like the pointing out instruction of Tibetan Buddhism, but backwards. They do it in sort of inverted ways.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
how do you feel towards that part of you?
Hmm.
So who is aware of that part? And
Hmm.
then where are we aware from? That's
Hmm.
one of what Locke's questions are. So sometimes even somatically, we can identify, oh, I'm aware of this part from here. And
Hmm.
sometimes that can help us detect another part that might be like, I don't want to deal with this very vulnerable part of me that just can't seem to get its act together.
Sure.
So we can ask for space from that. And it's interesting. I would have known this in meditation practice. You can ask a part for space, and if you cultivate a good relationship with it'll give you space.
Right. Right.
Where I was always sort of like, as you were, just trying to like fight it off and like, let me stay one pointed with my
Focus.
breath or
Focus.
something
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, which was a good start, but there's so much more possible.
Yeah. No, that relationship, I mean, it
Yeah.
understated, it can't be overstated. This idea that we're in parts work, in IFS work, we're building
Uh-huh.
a relationship with our parts in as real a sense of a word as we might have a relationship with humans on the outside.
Right.
And to me also, you know, revolutionary from my perspective, and this idea that exactly, like, there may be a part that I'm in contact with that, I don't know, it's not a part of my system that's there all the time, or one that I'm very frequently in contact with, but it's there. The part is there. And when I am in contact with that part in a session, in a
Right.
meditation, something like that, that I can be in I and can be in relationship, in the very literal sense of the word. I can ask questions like, what's going on for you? Is there anything that you want to share? And be very interested in what it might say. I can ask, is there, is there something that you're needing? Is there something different that you need in order to be more supported? And
Right.
I can listen with clarity around what arises from that. I can make agreements. What do you need? Do you need more time? Do you need more space? And make agreements as though I'm making an agreement with a client, or someone else. So that idea of treating them seriously, the
Mm-hmm.
the internal parts, from a from a relational perspective, and it is, to me, one of the key elements of IFS that I have found makes it so powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that if we bring it back to meditation, is that that's the whole thing we're trying to do, is cultivate this sort of different kind of relationship with ourselves, so that then it can extend to others. That's the whole purpose of the training. Um, the At the end of the MBSR class, John Kabat-Zinn would always say, F week 8 is the rest of your life, and um, that's the real meditation. Is how am I with my son? How am I
Hmm.
with my wife? How am I with colleagues and clients and family of origin? And so exactly what you're describing, how you're doing it it's not just Alex self-reflecting.
Right,
It's
right. Active. It's
it
more active than that.
Right. It's actually working with what's, the patterns of thought and feeling that will come up when you're talking to other people. And so if we're able to free up some of these parts from um, these extreme roles that they've been in, uh, there's this tremendous capacity that's freed up, that we can be with others in their, you know, in their not so pretty parts as well.
Right, right,
Yeah.
right. Exactly. Yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, Bob, I'm watching the time, and I'm seeing
Yeah,
that
we
we've
really
already,
went for it.
we've
See, this
overshot
is what
our.
happens when we don't talk for a while.
It's
Yeah.
true. It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything that would feel like any. anything that would help our conversation feel complete? I mean, to me, it was really, really rich
Yeah.
to hear your
Yeah.
reflections. What else? What have we missed?
What have we missed? I don't think we've missed anything. I think it's just emphasizing that whether, we're talking about a specific model of IFS and somatic experiencing in Buddhism, but that it can be found in multiple traditions, multiple models, and found in people that have nothing to do with any of these things.
Yeah.
We're talking about a very human thing. And in some ways, it comes through embracing our vulnerability. So sometimes what I'll share is that we always view vulnerability as a liability. I think Brene Brown is a superstar in being able to show people, but that one of my teachers taught me that vulnerability is actually an empowerment rather than a weakness,
Hmm.
because it opens up the channel for all of this,
Yeah,
for us to be
absolutely.
with all of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wish people Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche used to say, "Good luck," so yeah, I just wish people a lot of luck and
Yeah.
good fortune with their practices, and just as they work with what they wish wasn't there inside them, that um, there's good things that can happen.
So wonderful. Well, practical question, Bob. Bob, do you have any space in your practice? If
Uh,
how
it's
how
it's
how long is your waiting list? Could
the answer is sometimes. Yeah, it's I think with obviously the public health crisis from COVID-19, that it has led to this other um, quite dramatic public health crisis of mental health. And I know that May is mental health awareness, and I think I knew that before, but I'm seeing it lots of different organizations. I got an email from my son's USA lacrosse organization. They're talking about it. The
Hmm.
place where I
Hmm.
work out is putting it in their newsletter. And I just think it's a conversation that people are more ready to have, because everybody kind of gets it a little more viscerally. So
Yeah.
yeah, you're welcome to put my information there. People can reach out, and any um, good therapist has a network of trusted therapists too.
Referrals.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, that it's none of us can do this alone. So that if you're interested in working in this kind of way, uh, there's people that will be out there. And so yeah, I'd love helping folks.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Bob. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Red Beard Embodiment Podcast. To learn more, visit us at redbeardsomatictherapy.com or send me an email at alex@redbeardsomatictherapy.com. If today's conversation resonated with you, help spread the word by subscribing and sharing with others. Hope to see you next time.